The air crackled with tension as the Gorn captains circled Damon Calloway, their mocking laughter filling the cold steel walls of the Gorn cruiser. Blood stained his uniform, his body broken, but his eyes burned with something far fiercer than mere survival. One of the captains, an alien as large as a wall, sneered. "You're nothing but a shadow of your former self, human," the captain growled, his voice echoing in the silence. "The Widowmaker? More like the Broken Widow." Damon's lips barely twitched. He knew what was coming next. With a rasping breath, he straightened and stared the captain dead in the eyes. "My name," he said quietly, "is Widowmaker." The room froze. The Gorn captains exchanged wary glances. The myth. The legend. The last mercenary any of them would ever underestimate again. The cold steel of the Gorn cruiser pressed against Damon's battered body. His face was a canvas of bruises, cuts, and dried blood, but the worst damage was invisible. Inside, the shattered remnants of his former self clung desperately to a sense of purpose. His hands were bound behind him, wrists raw from the shackles. The mocking laughter of the Gorn captains filled the stark room, a sound that had once sent chills down his spine. Now, it only made his teeth grind harder. They were a ragtag crew of mercenaries. He had been their leader, their savior. Now, they were nothing more than prisoners of war. The Gorn had ambushed them on the moon of Vittoria Prime, where Damon had hoped to strike at their supply line. But somewhere, somehow, his plan had failed. He had led his team into a trap. A trap set by enemies who had already seen his kind come and go. A trap that had broken him. "Look at this one," a Gorn captain sneered, walking around Damon with slow, deliberate steps. His alien face, all fangs and sharp angles, hovered just inches from Damon's. The Great Widowmaker. The name was spat with disdain, like a curse too vile to speak. Damon didn't respond. His eyes remained steady, focused on the floor. The room was dim, but he could still make out the dim shadows of his captors, towering above him in their scaly armor. The Gorn were a terrifying sight, brutal in their efficiency, merciless in their tactics. But Damon had faced worse. Much worse. "You really think you can still fight?" Another captain laughed. This one was smaller than the rest, his scorn filled with a sharp edge of condescension. "You're nothing now. Just a broken soldier." Damon's jaw tightened. He had once been an elite soldier of Earth, a captain in the fleet, feared by enemies and respected by allies. His name had been whispered with reverence and fear across the galaxy. But those days were gone. The betrayal. The loss of comrades. The guilt. It had shattered him. And yet, even in his shattered state, the Gorn had made one critical mistake. They didn't know who they were dealing with. "I used to believe in honor," Damon said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "But I've seen too much death to care about honor anymore." The Gorn chuckled. "A broken man, indeed." The captain stepped back, giving Damon a mock salute. "But tell me, Widowmaker, where's your fire? Where's the ruthless killer who brought entire fleets to their knees?" Damon's gaze flickered up, locking with the captain's. There was something in his eyes, something cold, something that hinted at a resurgence. The Gorn didn't see it. They never did. "You want to know who I am?" Damon's voice was low, controlled. "I'm the man who's going to kill you." The room fell silent. The captains exchanged glances, their amusement flickering. One of them, a hulking brute with an arm like a tree trunk, growled low in his throat. You're done. You're broken." "I don't wait for orders," Damon whispered. The words hung in the air, more chilling than any threat. For a moment, the Gorn didn't move. They hadn't understood before. This wasn't a man who needed orders. This wasn't a man who followed the rules. They had seen him fight once, in his prime, a lethal machine who struck fear into anyone who stood in his path. But that was before the fall. Before they had shattered him. But the Widowmaker was never truly gone. He had only been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then, the mocking laughter resumed, but this time it faltered. Something had shifted in the air. The Gorn captain nearest Damon, his face a twisted mask of smug superiority, paused. You think you're still a threat? The Gorn captain's voice was strained now, as though the mention of Damon's codename had unsettled him. I'm not a threat, Damon replied, meeting the captain's gaze head-on. I'm the nightmare that follows you. The room quieted again, a dangerous tension simmering beneath the surface. The captains circled Damon, their eyes narrowing, studying him as though he were some strange creature. His words, his codename, had struck a chord they weren't prepared for. The Widowmaker wasn't just a myth. He was real. And though Damon had lost everything, there was one thing he hadn't lost: his rage. The Gorn captain who had been taunting him stepped forward, eyes glinting with malice. So, the Widowmaker is still alive? How quaint. Tell me, human, what exactly do you think you're going to do? He leaned in closer. You're trapped. Your crew is dead. Your ship is gone. You're a broken man. Damon didn't flinch. His mind was already working, calculating. His team was still alive, captured, yes, but alive. He wouldn't let them die. Not after everything they'd been through. I'm going to show you what happens when you underestimate humanity, Damon said, his voice low but steady. The Gorn captain sneered. You're nothing now. Just a broken shell of a man. Damon's lip curled slightly in a bitter smile. Maybe. But even broken shells can make a dent in your skull. The room erupted into laughter again, but this time, it was different. There was a crack in their confidence, a flicker of doubt. Damon didn't need to say another word. They had all heard the rumors. The Widowmaker, the human mercenary who had torn through entire armies without breaking a sweat. The name that had haunted the galaxy for years. They thought him dead. They thought him weak. But they didn't know Damon Calloway. They didn't know the hunger that still burned in his chest. He wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The captain turned away, signaling his soldiers to continue their mocking. But Damon had already made his decision. The first step was always the hardest, but once he started moving, there would be no stopping him. They would learn. The hard way. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And Damon Calloway, the Widowmaker, was going to prove it. Damon sat in the cold, metal chair of the Gorn brig, his hands still shackled behind his back, his thoughts heavy with the weight of past decisions. The mocking laughter of the Gorn captain still echoed in his ears, but it was fading, replaced by the familiar and bitter taste of regret. They had taken his crew, his ship, and everything he had fought for. But they hadn't broken him. Not yet. His mind wandered back to the beginning, to the man he once was. Before the war. Before the betrayals. Before the darkness had claimed him. He had been the best, the Widowmaker. It wasn't a title that had come lightly. It was earned on the battlefields of countless wars, where he had been a shadow among the stars, striking fear into anyone who dared face him. When he had been with the Earth fleet, there had been no mission too impossible, no opponent too daunting. The name, Widowmaker, had struck terror in the hearts of enemies across the galaxy. His reputation was one of unyielding strength and cold efficiency. But that was before. Before the betrayal by General Ashcroft, before the massacre on Epsilon 4, where his entire squad had been wiped out. The mission had been a trap, and he had walked right into it. He had failed them, failed himself. The general had promised him victory, but instead Damon had been forced to watch his friends die, slowly, painfully. In the end, Damon had made a choice: to survive. He left Epsilon 4, and he left the Earth fleet behind. The Widowmaker had disappeared. Damon's eyes flicked to the small window in the brig, a sliver of the cold, distant stars beyond. He felt something stir within him, a flame that had lain dormant for too long. The Widowmaker hadn't been wiped away. He had been buried. And now, buried things had a way of coming back to life. A sound came from the doorway. Damon's eyes shifted, narrowing as a tall, reptilian figure stepped into the dim light of the cell. It was one of the Gorn soldiers, a guard, a mere pawn in the greater game of war. The creature's yellow eyes gleamed with the arrogance of a species that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. "You're still breathing," the Gorn said, its voice thick and guttural. "For now." Damon didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The Gorn were beneath him now, their taunts, their mocking, they were just noise, white noise, that couldn't drown out the truth in his mind. The truth that he had been broken. The Gorn soldier stepped forward, grabbing Damon by the shoulder and yanking him out of the chair. His body screamed in protest, but Damon gritted his teeth and fought to stay upright. "You think the Widowmaker still lives?" the Gorn guard sneered, shaking him. "We've heard the stories. But that's all they are. Stories." The words hit Damon like a punch to the gut, dragging him back to his lowest point, the moment when he had abandoned his humanity, his honor. He had let the Widowmaker die. He had let the reputation fade, and in doing so, he had become a shadow. A ghost. But shadows could be deadly. "You've underestimated me," Damon muttered under his breath. His voice was hoarse, but there was something behind it, something cold, something dangerous that began to stir in the pit of his chest. The Gorn guard didn't hear him, too busy basking in the illusion of control. The soldiers shoved Damon forward, sending him stumbling toward the far wall. He barely caught himself, but it didn't matter. He wasn't just fighting the Gorn anymore. He was fighting himself. Fighting the weakness that had consumed him for too long. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't the soldier who had failed. He was the Widowmaker. And the Gorn were going to learn that lesson the hard way. Damon's mind raced through the memories, through the arsenal of tactics and strategies that had once come so easily. He could almost hear the commands, his old voice, strong and unwavering, barking orders. He could see his team again, the men and women who had followed him, who had trusted him. "I'm not done," Damon whispered to himself. "I'm not finished." The door to the brig opened again, and this time, it wasn't a guard. It was one of the Gorn captains, the one who had mocked him the most. Nathake. She stepped into the room, her tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow on the floor. Her armor gleamed in the dim light, and her eyes narrowed as she surveyed him, as though trying to determine what had changed in him. Well, Nathake's voice was as smooth as it was venomous. "The Widowmaker speaks. Did you think we'd just let you die quietly, human? You're a relic now. Your time is over." Damon met her gaze. There was no fear in his eyes. Only cold resolve. "My time's never over," he replied, his voice steady, controlled. Nathake tilted her head, clearly amused. "Do you still think you can stand against us? Against me? Your empire doesn't scare me," Damon said, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "I've fought worse than you." "Oh?" Nathake stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with interest. "You've fought worse than the Gorn? Tell me, Widowmaker, which species was that? The Terrans you abandoned? Your own people?" The insult hit its mark, but Damon didn't flinch. "I haven't abandoned anyone," he said, his voice low but filled with the unmistakable fire of a man who had once held the galaxy in the palm of his hand. "I've just been waiting. Waiting for the right moment." Nathake laughed, her voice a harsh, throaty sound. "And what moment is that, human? The moment you made the mistake of capturing me." The Gorn captain's expression faltered, and Damon saw the flicker of doubt. It was only a moment, but it was enough. He wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The Widowmaker had been buried, yes, but now he was coming back. One calculated move at a time. Nathake straightened, her face hardening. "I'll enjoy watching you die, Widowmaker." Damon's gaze never wavered. "I'll enjoy proving you wrong." As Nathake turned to leave, Damon's thoughts surged forward with new clarity. He was no longer the broken mercenary. He was the Widowmaker, and it was time to remind the galaxy why that name was feared. The hum of the Gorn cruiser's engines vibrated through the walls of Damon's cell, steady and unyielding, just like the realization that gnawed at him. Time was running out. He could feel it in his bones, the pressure of being captured, the weight of his own survival instincts kicking in, and the echo of his past glory slipping further away with every passing minute. But even here, surrounded by enemies, shackled and bleeding, something inside him had reignited. His fingers flexed against the metal restraints, his wrists raw but unyielding. The physical pain was nothing new, but it was the mental sharpness, the returning clarity, that now occupied his mind. He wasn't just going to escape. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to make the Gorn regret the day they captured him. The first step was always the hardest, but Damon had never backed down from a challenge. The Widowmaker had been a weapon once, untouchable, lethal, feared across the galaxy, and he would be that again. The Gorn didn't understand it yet. They didn't understand that while his body had been broken, his will was iron. He had seen the cracks in their arrogance. That captain, Nathake, she had underestimated him. She still thought him a relic, a fading star whose light had long since burned out. But the truth was, Damon had no intention of burning out. He was just starting to burn again. And the first fire to rekindle? The need for vengeance. Damon's mind was already working, his tactical brain shifting gears in a way he hadn't allowed it to in years. The Gorn had made a grave mistake by underestimating him. They had imprisoned him, but they had given him something in return: information. In his cell, Damon had learned more than he had ever anticipated, more about the Gorn's tactics, more about their weaknesses. And now, he had to use it. The guards had changed shifts, and now, it was time to move. Damon's pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. The door to his cell opened with a mechanical hiss, and a Gorn soldier entered, a small, reptilian creature whose body was wrapped in dark green scales. It was here to deliver food, or so it thought. The creature had no idea what it was walking into. The moment the door opened, Damon's legs were already in motion. He swung his bound wrists up toward the soldier's throat, the chain wrapping around the Gorn's neck with a force that surprised even Damon. The soldier barely had time to react before Damon yanked him toward the wall. With a grunt, the soldier's head collided with the steel, and it slumped unconscious to the floor. Damon didn't waste a second. He stripped the soldier of its weapon, a small blaster that was more suited for a personal defense than an all-out battle. But it would do. It was a start. His shackles were still a problem, but that would be dealt with soon. He looked around the cell, his sharp eyes scanning for anything useful. There, in the corner, a small maintenance console, part of the ship's automated systems, glowed faintly. If he could access it, he might be able to override the lock on his restraints. The Gorn hadn't bothered to fully secure it. They had grown complacent, arrogant in their victory. Damon moved quickly, his steps silent despite the weight of his armor. The soldier's blaster was still in his hand, but it wasn't for fighting. Not yet. It was for survival. He reached the console, kneeling beside it, and began working quickly. The Gorn had failed to account for one thing: humans were resourceful. Damon's fingers flew over the interface, overriding the basic protocols with ease. Years of experience, both as a soldier and as a mercenary, had honed his ability to manipulate systems like these. The shackles clicked open, falling to the ground with a soft thud. Damon stood, flexing his fingers, and for the first time since his capture, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. His mind was clear now. The Widowmaker was back. The doors slid open again, and this time, it wasn't a Gorn soldier. It was Nathake. The captain? She had come to see for herself if the Widowmaker had truly risen from the ashes. The cold calculation in her eyes was unmistakable. "You've managed to escape," she said, her voice laced with both irritation and a hint of surprise. "Impressive." Damon didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he raised the blaster and aimed it at her. His hands were steady, his grip firm, but his mind was elsewhere, already calculating his next move. The Gorn captain stood still, her posture unflinching, as though she believed she could somehow intimidate him with her sheer presence. "You think you've won?" Nathake's voice was calm, but there was an edge of something dangerous beneath it. "You're nothing more than a broken human. You can't stand against the Gorn Empire. Damon's eyes didn't leave her. I don't need to stand against your entire empire, he replied. I only need to make sure you fall. Nathaka's lip curled, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. A twinge of doubt. You're a fool, she said, but Damon didn't care. He had heard that before. The Gorn had always underestimated humanity. I've been called worse, Damon said quietly. And then he pulled the trigger. The shot hit the Gorn captain square in the chest, knocking her back with a force that sent her crashing into the far wall. But Damon didn't wait to watch her fall. He turned and sprinted down the corridor, his heart hammering with adrenaline. He could feel the plan unfolding now, the escape, the vengeance, all moving in synchrony. Damon rounded the corner and found himself face to face with another Gorn soldier. Without a second thought, he fired, hitting the soldier in the shoulder. The creature staggered back, but Damon was already moving past it, faster than the Gorn could react. He needed to reach the command deck. He needed to reach the heart of the Gorn Empire's operations on this ship. As he moved, he realized something that made his heart beat even faster. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about making a statement. It was about showing the galaxy, showing the Gorn, that humanity would never be cowed. They had thought him weak. They had thought him broken. But Damon Calloway was no longer a ghost. He was the Widowmaker. And the galaxy was about to remember why that name had once been feared. The ship's metal hallway stretched before him, but now, for the first time in years, Damon felt alive. The Gorn cruiser's halls were quiet now, save for the faint echo of Damon's boots striking the cold, metallic floor. He moved with purpose, each step a calculated decision, each breath filled with the sharp clarity of someone who had regained control. His mind raced, not with panic, but with the singular focus of a man on the edge of a mission, his mission. The Gorn had underestimated him at every turn, but this was the final mistake they would make. They had captured him, mocked him, and thought him broken. But now, the Widowmaker was back, and the Gorn Empire would learn why they feared the name. Damon's grip tightened on the blaster he had taken from the guard. It was a small weapon, but in his hands, it felt like an extension of his body. He hadn't forgotten the battlefield, the rush of a fight. He'd just been dormant, buried beneath the weight of loss. But this was different. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for something bigger. He rounded another corner, and there it was, the door to the Gorn command deck. The heart of the beast. It was heavily guarded, as he expected. The Gorn would never leave their core operations unprotected. Damon paused for a moment, allowing himself to breathe, to let the tension build. In his mind, he saw his next moves, swift, brutal, and efficient. The Widowmaker didn't leave room for mistakes. As he approached the door, 2 Gorn soldiers stepped into view, their eyes locking onto him immediately. They recognized him, but too late. Damon didn't hesitate. He raised his blaster and fired twice, hitting the soldiers with pinpoint accuracy. One crumpled to the floor instantly, the other staggered, but Damon followed through with another shot to finish the job. The bodies fell, silent and swift. He wasn't just killing these Gorn. He was sending a message. Damon approached the door. There was a control panel beside it, no doubt for access to the inner sanctum. He examined it for a moment, then hacked into the system, overriding the security protocols with ease. He had learned all he needed to know in the past few hours. This wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress, and Damon had been trained to breach fortresses. The door slid open. Inside, the command deck was a far cry from the rest of the ship's sterile, utilitarian corridors. This was the nerve center, where the Gorn plotted their wars and monitored their vast empire. The room was dominated by a long, sleek table where several Gorn commanders were seated. The atmosphere was tense, but when they saw Damon enter, their expressions shifted: confusion, fear, and finally, recognition. Damon could see Nathaka among them. Her eyes flickered when she saw him, but she remained calm, as if nothing could shake her. That was her mistake. The confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Nathaka said, her voice smooth, laced with cold disdain. "But you're still a dead man." Damon didn't respond. He simply raised the blaster, taking aim at the closest commander. The shot rang out, sharp and sudden, and the commander dropped without a sound. "Who's next?" Damon's voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a promise that this was only the beginning. Nathake's face twisted into a snarl. "You think you can take us all on, human? You're nothing but a nuisance." "I'm more than that," Damon replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm the reason you won't leave this ship alive." One of the other commanders lunged for a weapon, but Damon was faster. His fingers squeezed the trigger again, and the second commander collapsed with a clean shot to the chest. The room fell into chaos. The remaining Gorn soldiers scrambled to grab their weapons, but Damon was already moving, calculating, taking them down one by one with lethal precision. In the span of a minute, the command deck was a battlefield, the Gorn who had once mocked him now lying lifeless at his feet. His breath came steady, his hands sure, the fight as natural as breathing. He wasn't just killing his captors. He was cleansing the space. Taking back what was his. Only Nathake remained, standing at the far end of the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Damon walked toward her slowly, purpose in every step. The blaster was still in his hand, but his focus was on something deeper now. This wasn't just about defeating her, it was about proving a point. About showing that no matter how far they pushed him, humanity would never break. "I told you," Damon said, his voice low but firm. "You underestimated me." Nathake finally moved, her expression hardening. "You should have stayed down, human. You should have stayed dead." "I'm not dead," Damon replied. "And I'm not staying down." She lunged, her hand reaching for a blade at her side, but Damon anticipated the move. His training, his instincts, everything snapped into place as he sidestepped, using her momentum against her. He grabbed her arm, twisting it with a brutal force that sent the blade clattering to the floor. For a moment, they stood facing each other, locked in a silent battle of wills. Nathake's eyes flickered with something, fear, perhaps, or recognition. "Why?" she spat, her voice barely a hiss. "Why fight for a dead species? You've lost everything." "I fight because I haven't lost everything," Damon said, his voice unwavering. "I fight because I'm still here. And as long as I'm breathing, I'll make sure you regret underestimating me." Without another word, Damon twisted her arm, bringing her to the ground. The final click of the blaster echoed in the room, and Nathake's body went still. Damon stood over her, the weight of what he had just done settling in. There was no satisfaction in the kill, no rush of victory. Only the cold, hard truth of what it meant to be the Widowmaker. The job was never done. There was always more to fight for, more to reclaim. He turned and looked around the room, at the bodies of the fallen commanders. The Widowmaker wasn't just a name. It was a symbol. A reminder that no matter how broken a person became, they could always rise again. And now, as Damon stood in the heart of the Gorn Empire's command, he knew one thing for sure: the galaxy would remember his name. Humanity would never be broken. And the Widowmaker was far from finished. The Gorn cruiser was silent now, its once thriving command deck littered with the bodies of its commanders. The lights above flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the cold, sterile walls. Damon stood in the center of the room, his breath steady and measured, the weight of what he had just done settling in. It wasn't the victory he had imagined, not in the way he thought it would feel. No cheers, no celebrations, only the hollow silence of a battle fought and won. The Gorn had underestimated him. They had thought him broken, thought him weak. They thought he would fall when they captured him, but Damon had proven them wrong. And now, as he looked down at the fallen leaders of the Gorn Empire, something stirred within him. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about more than his past, more than the broken mercenary who had lost everything. It was about standing up for something bigger than himself. It was about sending a message. Not just to the Gorn, but to the galaxy at large. He reached for his communicator, still attached to his wrist despite the blood that stained his uniform. His fingers brushed over the controls, bringing up the visual feed of his crew. They had been taken, imprisoned just like he had. And like him, they had been underestimated. Damon had freed himself, but there was still more to do. His crew needed to be liberated. Together, they would bring the fight to the Gorn Empire. The screen blinked to life, revealing the faces of his team. They were alive, injured yes, but alive. Relief surged through Damon's chest. But there was no time to waste. The Gorn were not defeated yet. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. "Damon," said Marla, his second in command, her voice cracking through the static. "We've been waiting for your signal. What's the plan?" Damon's voice was steady. "We take the Gorn's flagship. We end this here." Marla's eyes flashed with recognition. She knew the gravity of what he was saying. The flagship was the heart of the Gorn Empire's war machine. Taking it would send a message the galaxy would never forget. But it wasn't just the Gorn that Damon had to worry about. There was another problem lurking in the background. The Gorn Empire wasn't their only enemy. The powerful Galactic Council, with its intricate web of politics and betrayal, had long viewed humanity with disdain. And now that Damon had made himself a target once again, he knew the Council would be forced to react. "Understood," Marla said. "We'll be ready." Damon cut the connection, his mind already working through the logistics of what would come next. The Gorn were not the only threat in this galaxy. There were others who would see Damon's victory as a challenge to their own power. Others who would stop at nothing to see him erased from history. But Damon wasn't afraid of them. He was the Widowmaker, and if there was one thing he knew, it was how to make enemies regret underestimating humanity. He moved quickly, making his way toward the bridge of the cruiser. The Gorn had locked the ship down, but Damon had learned their systems well. He used his knowledge to bypass security and gain access to the command center. His team was already in position, preparing for the final assault. The Gorn flagship would not be theirs for long. When Damon stepped onto the bridge, he found the last remaining Gorn captain waiting for him. She was tall, her eyes narrowed in suspicion, but there was something else in them, something like respect. She knew who Damon was. She knew what he was capable of. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice deep and slow. Damon didn't answer right away. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He could feel the weight of the Gorn captain's gaze, but he wasn't fazed. "I haven't won yet," he said. "But I'm about to." The captain laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You're foolish. You've defeated a handful of us, but the Gorn Empire is vast. You cannot win. You will not win. I've never needed to win everything," Damon replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I only need to win this." With that, he raised his weapon. The captain's eyes flickered to the side as she reached for her own, but Damon was faster. The blaster shot rang out, striking her square in the chest. She crumpled to the floor with a final, gasping breath. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Damon didn't wait for anyone to react. He moved to the control panel, his fingers flying over the console. The Gorn had been careless. Damon's familiarity with their technology worked in his favor, and in moments the ship's systems were under his control. The Gorn flagship, once a symbol of their power, was now his to command. He tapped the comms system. "All units prepare for takeoff. We leave now." The ship's engines hummed to life, a deep rumble that reverberated through Damon's chest. He felt the surge of power, the weight of his decision. They were going to fight back, to take what had been stolen from humanity. And this time, there would be no surrender. He looked out at the stars, a vast ocean of possibility. The Gorn Empire might have been powerful, but Damon had a weapon they hadn't accounted for: humanity's unyielding will to survive. They had underestimated him, and they would pay the price. As the ship surged into hyperspace, Damon allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The Widowmaker had once been a name whispered in fear across the galaxy. Now, it would be a name that echoed across the stars, A reminder to anyone who would dare underestimate humanity. The Gorn might have thought they had won. They might have believed they had broken him. But Damon Calloway had risen from the ashes of his past, and now, as the Widowmaker, he would bring the fight to them, and to anyone else who dared challenge humanity's place in the galaxy. The war was just beginning. And Damon, the Widowmaker, would be the one to lead humanity's charge.